Ladies and gentlemen, this is Internet Personality Evangelist, and I cannot begin to tell you how long my anticipation's been building for DC Collectibles' Bruce Timm Designer Series. This is Batman in his New Adventures design, kicking off that line and introducing us to, well, everything that line's about. There's going to be a mix of BTAS and Tinba designs on the line, and another Batman from the animated series is already confirmed. This could well be the line I've always been waiting for. Taking a gander at the sculpt, it sure feels like I finally found a plastic animated Batman for me. He looks superb, capturing all kinds of signature shapes and lines in a three-dimensional form, and generally looking really good from a bevy of angles. The classic Bruce Timm barrel chest and taper-down legs are here in full force, as is a head sculpt that is stunning in its representation of very specific simplicity. This is supported by some fairly good paintwork, which can be a bit of a dice roll if you aren't able to inspect the figure in person before making a purchase. Mine's got a good face and chest symbol, but I've seen one or two messier ones, and my own has got a bit of mush along the lines of his black bat briefs. Batman includes a really neat little display stand with some great turnaround model sheet printing on its white surface and a sort of hanky clear plastic arm for holding the figure, which doesn't entirely fit in back there when Batman's got his basic display cape attached. Despite the cape's flexible rubber nature, it kind of bulges out just enough to bother me, and you can try putting it around the back of the cape, but then you're just leaning him on a thing. Speaking of capes, there's an alternate cape for when you want to actually pose Batman outside of variations of standing still and looming at people. You need to pop his head off, which I found to require a little bit of tilting and force. Luckily, his neck joint seems to be made of rugged and durable plastic, a polymer I'd really like to have seen in, like, every other joint, to be honest. As far as I can tell, this is the only part of the figure that has this kind of matte palm-like finish. This cape looks fine if you only want to leave one on most of the time, and hey, it's pretty badass to include a separate cape entirely for alternate display purposes, still at that $20 to $25 price point. Pushing things even further in a direction I was surprised to see from a company like DC Collectibles, this Batman includes a whole whack of alternate hand swap options. The hands all peg in and out of the wrists, and if you find things aren't playing fast and easy, turn to a heat source like a hairdryer before applying any kind of tilting or yanking force. Those pegs may be more brittle than you expect. After starting off with a pair of fists, Batman also has a pair of slightly open, slightly relaxed hands. The next pair work with his soul-included Batarang, able to hold it in a nimble and "I'm gonna throw this in your face" sort of fashion. The third pair of hands appear to be for holding on to the handles or other cylindrical things, and he doesn't come with any, so I guess they're there for a hypothetical bat cycle or something. There's one last hand, a right hand sculpted holding onto his grapnel, which is sculpted into that hand. How many more times can I say sculpted? I don't know. The hook can twist and detach for the sake of doing so, and there's a handless grapnel for the display option of having it lie on the floor nearby. Doesn't seem to plug into his belt or anything else, so hooray! The most clever piece of posability on this guy is actually in his head. You see his neck is flowing right into the cape cowl slope here. That means his head can only really twist left and right. However, this is on a ball joint. It's set down on its, like, second click, but you can move it up one click by, like, just starting to unseat it for the cape swap. And if you do that, then... there we go. There is, like, another detent in there. I haven't been able to, like, spot it, but I think there's, like, a rib in there. And when you get his head to this point, it still looks pretty good. It's a bit more separated here, but now he has an amazing range of ball-jointed neck posability. And I really like this. I think it looks fantastic. And he just thinks it all looks like kind of, like, quizzical. Like, what are you doing? Untwist my neck. So I really like that. That's probably the best piece of engineering on this toy, and I don't mean that as a knock. I mean that as that is really cool. His waist is just a simple left and right swivel. His shoulders are on universal joints. Pretty good range of motion forward and backwards, but they only go out that far. Now, as far as I can tell, this is happening because they wanted to maintain a smooth look up here, and didn't want to have, like, you know, a cut in there for the rest of the hinge that you can see down here. Thing is, up there, that is 99% of the time underneath his cape. I really think that the cuts for those joints should have gone all as far as they could, so you could at least get his arms out a bit farther. Maybe have the joint extend out and move up some more too, in case there's some banging going on with the aesthetic here. It's a little disappointing, this range. This could have been better. It's only like 45 degrees out, and I think he needed more. He's got an elbow joint that bends just about 90 degrees, just about. it also allows for a bicep swivel, and I really like how they did this, because it means that his bicep swivel is part of the cut in here for this elbow joint. The aesthetics on this guy make a lot of sacrifices for the articulation, but I think they make as few as possible, and I really like how both joints are worked together in there. His wrists can swivel, but be careful when you're doing this. They also have a Figma kind of joint to go like this. Be really careful with that, because, like, here, I'll show you on another hand. Like, you know, you can pull this hand in and out, and it's okay. You want to just make sure you're always applying forward-backward pressure. But take one of his other hands, for instance. Like this one. All of his spare hands were insanely locked up out of the package, i.e. the Figma joint was super locked up, and I had to do some carving and heat treatment to get any of these to move, and they all move really tight in a way that I kind of don't like. They aren't that hard to get in and out of his hands, although if they didn't go in with the same amount of pressure as the fists that were in there when we started, I think I shaved a little bit here and there just with a file very gently. However, within like 10 seconds of touching this peg, the hand that's sculpted with the grappling hook, had its peg snap off. I've glued it back on, and it survived even going in and out, because after I glued it back on, I also filed this down so there'd be less friction. But this peg on mine snapped immediately, and I'm one of the lucky ones, because that's the only one that snapped immediately. I have friends who lost other hands, or more important hands than this grapnel hook thing. So be really careful with those wrist joints. They are one of the points of fragility on this figure, particularly in the other hands that don't spend their whole shipping time locked up in there. His hips are pretty cool. They've got a T-crotch, and then they've got a hinge to go outwards, and there's a little bit of clicking, like I think some intentional sculpted detents in there. I like how that feels. On mine, these feel really good. I've seen it argued that it kind of sucks that you can see the pins here. It's definitely an aesthetic bummer, but I don't really care, because it's posability, and I will take the posability as long as the silhouette remains the same, and it does. Just the surface detail that's suffering. His knees are a simple hinge. They bend okay, and I mean like, okay, and there's no thigh swivel. I don't want a thigh swivel up here, like on all the other DCC stuff, where it totally just ganks the sculpt as soon as you twist the thigh, but I'm looking at this setup right here, and I'm wondering where this is down here. I don't think this is thin enough to prevent this from working, especially when they're doing this kind of stuff in the wrists, so I'm really disappointed that there is no above-the-knee twist on these legs. It really limits the posability on this guy. Trying to make up for it, there is a boot swivel, and the boot is a separate piece of plastic, so that's kind of cool, but it doesn't help a whole ton. And going to the next part of severe fragility I've seen in reports of this figure, his ankles. So his ankles are pretty tight, moving forward and backwards, and there's also a twist on the peg there. His ankles are basically like, it's like a stick going into his foot, and then that stick then C-clips onto a joint here. These ankles have broken on several people's figures, sometimes straight out of the box. And if your ankles on your Batman, if you did get one of these, is not feeling too good, be careful with it. Mine are making this kind of creaky noise that sort of freaks me out, and I'm thinking I might get some shock oil in there, like what you do with Figuarts hips when they get squeaky. But these ankles are really tight. They're not like the Capullo Batman. Like, this guy can actually be held up really well on the weight of his ankles. It doesn't balance super well if you tip him all the way forward, but they can take it. He's not flopping down. You gotta be careful. This guy is not durable. He seems to be made entirely from the same rigid plastic, which means when it gets thin and is used for joints and load-bearing areas, it can get kind of brittle. And then you put it into cold temperatures, it gets more brittle. This thing is assembled while paint is wet. Paint gets stuck in there. NECA toys get stuck paint, but they're a flexible plastic, so at least it will tear first, or it'll start to bend and flex. This stuff is so rigid, especially without any heat introduced, it will just snap. I've seen many examples. Go looking online and you'll find many examples. Head into the Foosh thread and read the litanies. This seems to be the kind of Batman toy I've been waiting for all these years. It's my favorite aesthetic, it's so much more beefy and playable than any of the DCAU Mattel offerings, and it legitimately pushes the unspoken barriers of what Western action figure companies tend to offer on the collector diamond distribution style market. And in the case of mine, it's really fun to pose, if only to see a friggin' Tim-style action figure actually have articulation. The designers of this toy should be proud of what they've done so far, though they should not be complacent. I hope to see them open up the shoulder range and add some above-the-knee swivels in to complete the posability suite on future figures in this line. And I wish I could tell you that this is an easy recommendation. I love my copy of the figure, but mine didn't critically break, and several other folks weren't so fortunate. These Bruce Timm designer figures have been the bane of many of their fans because, speaking as one of them, none of us feel like we can responsibly tell you to go out and buy one. If you like what you see and this is something you've been waiting for, look, do what you want, but do it through a retailer that has a solid and reliable replacement program, be it online or local. DC Collectibles has entered a real trial by fire in attracting a whole new flock of collectors with these, as we're discovering a frustrating use of materials and assembly protocols that leads to joints that are far more fragile than they should be. Borderline glass-like on a bad production copy. This has got to change. These figures have got to have their production protocols revised. Their design work and engineering is too good to be so hamstrung on the factory level. I want to be able to recommend this! Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and if you decided to take a gamble on this line, be sure to leave feedback on how your figures turned out. To their credit, DC Collectibles is actively requesting customer reports on broken or defective pieces for the sake of improving future releases. I just hope that if things do get better, the early waves can receive a revision run. I'm tired of being terrified of my Batman's ankles, damn it.